Hello, everybody. So I want to welcome everyone to the December 2023 version of this training that we've been presenting for many years. We change it up every time, and I think this time it's going to be pretty good. I'm Janet Cox with Climate Action California, and I want to introduce our presenters and then turn it over to our co-sponsors to just say a word. So we're really lucky today to have Mary Buxton and Adam Sweeney doing parts of this presentation. You'll meet them in a minute. And Deborah Moore of Third Act is running tech and has generously let us use Third Act's webinar Zoom, which is fancier than what Climate Action California has. And just before we start, I want to introduce our co-sponsors and ask their leaders to say a couple of words. Sheila Dershowitz for Third Act's California Working Groups, and Antonina Markoff, who coordinates the Climate Reality Project's California Coalition. We couldn't be doing this without you. So over to Sheila.
Thank you, Janet. It is really exciting to be here. We have been planning this, and you have been, and others, working so hard to get us to this day. I welcome all of you who are here this afternoon with us. A special welcome to the many, many Third Act members around the state of California who are here. Some of you know that the first idea of this came from Third Act SoCal. I'm happy to be a member of that group. But as we've planned it and it's expanded, we have been able to include all of the Third Act members who were interested in joining, and it's a large number of you. We have 3 working groups in the state, so San Francisco Bay Area Group, the Sacramento Working Group, and of course, SoCal Group. As I mentioned, the idea came from SoCal, but I want to particularly thank Janet, because when we approached her with the idea of a legislative training, she immediately embraced us, embraced the idea, and I'm just so excited that we're here today for our first session. Thank you, Janet, and thank you all for the work you've been doing.
Thank you. And Antonina.
And I am Antonina Markoff. I am the coordinator for the Climate Reality Project California Coalition, and I'm really excited to welcome you all, and excited that we are collaborating with Third Act for the first time. I hope that this is a long and effective and collaborative relationship. We certainly value you as an organization and welcome you as part of our extended family. And Climate Reality Project, I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with it, but we are at the California Coalition. We represent the chapters of the Climate Reality Project in California. There are about 9 chapters throughout a good portion of the state. We represent about 4,000 members. Many of our coalition, Climate Reality California Coalition members are participating today. You'll hear more about that at the end. And I'm also want to thank Janet and the CAC. We have evolved together, and we have a wonderful collaborative relationship, and I'm excited to broaden that and again welcome you all.
Thanks, Antonina. And I can just say a couple of words about Climate Action California. We've been existing as Climate Action California for actually less than a year. Before that, we were the legislative policy arm of 350 Silicon Valley, but we were really working statewide. We take science-based positions on all kinds of climate issues. Specifically, we want to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, move toward electrification of transportation, and support measures that will speed the transition to a low carbon economy. We work in teams that are working specifically in issues like building decarbonization or energy or plastics. The teams are all fairly focused and looking at a range of both bills and policy issues at the state level and also in Washington, D.C. And we meet a couple of times a month to sort of debrief and share the work that we're doing with each other. And it's an amazingly great group. And these training sessions are really an important part of what we do. So with that, let me just throw in a couple of housekeeping details. If you need closed captioning, please enable it on your device. It's all set up, but you have to turn it on, and then it should work. If it doesn't, tell us in the chat. And everyone will appreciate it if you put your name, where you're from, the group you're with, if you're with a group, in the chat. We're going to leave the chat on just for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll turn it off. And during the presentation, if you can put your questions in the Q&A field on your Zoom screen, we will get to questions at the end. And you'll be able to see the questions that other people are asking. So if somebody has already asked your question, you don't need to repeat it. But I expect we're going to have a good session with a lot of interesting questions at the end. So thank you. Can we look at the agenda screen, Deborah? So this is our agenda for today. We're going to talk mostly about the legislative process, who the players are in Sacramento. We'll walk you through the year in the legislature and talk a little bit about the budget. And as you know from signing up, there's a part 2 of this training will happen in January, and then we'll talk about how we actually advocate. So with that, I want to introduce Mary Buxton, who will set the scene in Sacramento for us. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm going to cover the part of this talk that talks about the structure of the California legislature. And I just wanted to say that I moved around so much as a kid. I missed civics altogether. So this is always great for me to get more learning about how legislative process works. And it's part of the fun of working with Climate Action California. Next slide, please. Okay, the bicameral legislature, sorry. In several ways, the California legislature is organized like the US Congress. There are 2 houses, and in California, we have the Senate and the Assembly. Bills need to pass both houses before they can land on the governor's desk, and then he or she, but he for now, either vetoes or signs the bill. And unlike Washington, in our state, one party has pretty firm control in Sacramento, and that's the Democrats. They have supermajorities in both houses, which means they're like over 2/3 vote without any Republican votes. And so it's big enough to pass, say, tax law that requires 2/3. And well, that's conceivably, there might be cases where that wouldn't be a slam dunk. But so that's the 2 houses. Next slide, please. And in the legislative session, like Washington, we have 2-year sessions. So bills that don't make it in the first year have another year to come back around. And some of the climate bills that we have often take 2 years and sometimes even a second session to pass. So next slide. Okay, the Senate and the Assembly. We have 40 state senators, and each district has about 930,000 people, and it also comprises 2 assembly districts. And the senators have 4-year terms. The assembly members have 2-year terms, and on the even years, they have to run for re-election. And there's a term limit for 12 years in the Senate, Assembly, or a combination of the two. And some of that is good and some of that is bad, because sometimes people get their footing in Sacramento, but then they might start looking for another job that has a more long-term horizon, like a county supervisor or city council. And so that's maybe an unfortunate part of the term limits. Then in 2024, an unusual number of seasoned legislators are terming out, and there's an open Senate seat that's a pretty rare opportunity. So 3 well-known Congress people are giving up their seats to run for that, and there's a big, huge amount of churn going on. Exciting thing is some of the people we work with are actually running for seats in the Assembly. So that's kind of fun because you get to know these people and it's fun to watch them grow. And in general, the Assembly tends to be more conservative than the Senate. Most climate bills get started in the Senate, and by the time they make it through the Assembly, they might have several amendments that really weaken the bill that was an excellent bill to start with, and then it's kind of watered down. So that's something to know about the process. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the district maps of the Assembly districts and the state Senate districts. So it kind of gives you a sense of, the distribution of these districts. You might have to study it a little more closely later. LA is really rich in Assembly districts, as is the Bay Area. Our area differs though, because we have a lot of green representatives, so it's more homogeneous, where LA, I think, has people from different orientations in office. Okay, next slide. Okay, elections matter. Redistricting happened everywhere in 2022 in the census, and that meant that the districts were redrawn for the state legislature as well as the U.S. Congress. And in that shuffle, a lot of the legislators did resign or ran for other offices. So now there are 27 of 80 new Assembly members, and 8 of 40 senators are brand new to the legislature this year. So we have not quite gotten the handle on who everyone is and what makes them tick, but it's our job, and it's because of all these groups joining together in coalition that we're able to have a much wider reach to all these different districts. And now I'm going to turn it over to Janet for a little more inside info on who's in charge and how their power works. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. That was very helpful. So the next part of this, we want to talk a little bit about the personalities in Sacramento and how they are affecting our work, which is really significant. So the leadership is super important. The Senate President Pro Tem and the Speaker of the Assembly have a lot of power, starting with appointing committee chairs and the members of committees and the members of select committees, because these folks have tremendous control over the shape of bills that we end up seeing after they've made their way through the process. At the moment, the President Pro Tem of the Senate is Toni Atkins, who is a very seasoned legislator. She was the Speaker of the Assembly before she moved over to the Senate. She is terming out in 2024 and has named her successor, who is Mike McGuire from the North Coast. And I think that he's probably not going to take office until January. And we're just kind of waiting to see what he does about committee chairs and the decisions that he is going to make. Meanwhile, in the Assembly, the Speaker is now Robert Rivas from Hollister. He is a relatively, he's only been there for about 3 terms. He is a pretty gutsy guy. There was a bruising fight to get him into the speakership before the previous speaker, Anthony Rendon, who also terms out in 2024, was ready to go. But Rivas took over in July, and shockingly, he released a list of new committee chairs a couple of weeks ago that was really quite surprising. There are a lot of younger, newer, less seasoned legislators are now chairing committees in the Assembly, and I think it's going to be a wild ride. We're just going to have to see. But with both houses changing leadership and so much churn among committees and committee chairs, we're kind of going to be feeling our way for the next several months, if not longer. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the allies that we work with. The groups on this slide are normally in agreement with us, and we definitely team up to support climate legislation. This is in addition to Climate Action California's coalition partners, the Climate Reality Project chapters, Third Act, the folks that we are really part of our decision-making structure. But it's a pretty healthy group of folks who all have the best interests of the climate at heart. Next slide is the opposition, and the difference between these groups and the groups on the previous slide is largely money. These folks kind of run the table to the extent that they can. The election year is the second year of the session is an election year, as Mary has said, for everybody. And it's tough because everybody's running for office and they need the campaign contributions. And these are the folks who come up with the money. So it's just important to note, I think, that every time we win one, it's been a fight. It's just the way it is. This is existential for these groups. It's existential for us and the planet. And we're not going away, and they certainly aren't either. So it does make it kind of exciting. And that is the end of that section. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I know I went quickly through a lot of that. So the next section of this training, I'm going to try to talk you through the legislative year. I'm going to start with kind of a whirlwind tour that the bill has to take in order to get to the end of the session. So I'm going to talk fast through these two crazy slides, and then we'll slow it down when we get to the month-by-month description of the legislative year. So the first thing that happens is a senator or an assembly member decides to introduce a bill. And that may be something that they thought up or that was recommended by us or another interest group. The senator or the assembly member drafts something up and sends it to legislative council for legal review so that the state doesn't get sued if the thing passes, and final wording. Keep in mind that all of this is happening in the House, in the Senate for senators' bills, or in the Assembly for assembly members' bills. So the bill comes back from Leg Council. The bill is then introduced formally into the author's house. The Rules Committee then decides which policy committees, usually one, sometimes two, will hear the bill after it's been in print for 30 days. Then, after a bill is sent to the policy committee, the staff of that committee will analyze each bill pretty minutely and publish their findings and recommend amendments. And this is really important because every time an author presents a bill in a committee hearing, the chair of the committee will say, "Oh, are you taking the committee's amendments?" And the author says, "Oh, of course." And sometimes those amendments can be decimating to a bill. In a few cases, the amendments suggested in a committee lead the author to abandon the bill or hold it. And this is one of the things that happened with SB 233, which is a bill that we were very much in favor of, Nancy Skinner's bill, that would have made, would have required that electric vehicles be bidirectional. It was just decimated in committee, and Senator Skinner decided to try to bring it back this coming year and see if we can make it stronger again. So after the bill gets through the committees, and normally it does, it has seemed for the last year or so that most of the committees don't kill bills on the spot, unless sometimes if they are proposed by Republicans, and all of the committees, because of having the majorities in both houses, are chaired by Democrats. But mostly committees will amend a bill or not and send it to appropriations. Next slide, please. So what happens in appropriations is this is really where the sausage gets made in the dark. In appropriations, most bills are put onto suspense, which is a completely, it's an accurately descriptive but kind of bizarre term for what happens in a process like this. What really happens is that bills are sort of dumped into a dark closet for the rest of that session until appropriations decides what to do with the bill. And it's very mysterious. our hunch is that the decisions, live or die or be amended, are made by the chair of the Appropriations Committee and the leader of that house, but you're never going to really know about it for sure. Bills that make it through appropriations then go to the floor of the first house for an up or down vote. And if they pass the first house, they then go to the second house and start over with policy committees, another appropriations gamut, and another floor vote. And if they make it through there, they go to the governor. And that's the short version. And I'm sorry, it sounds long and confusing, but it's quite a year. Next slide, please. So starting on January 3rd of 2024, the legislative session opens. And January is pretty crazy, mostly because any bills that didn't make it through the first house and were stopped at any point in 2023 have until January 31st to pass the first house. In other words, if a bill didn't make it through a policy committee in 2023 and the author doesn't want to give up on it, then it has to go through that policy committee, has to go through appropriations, and it has to have a floor vote by the 31st of January. And it often happens that some of the most challenging bills take 2 sessions or longer to pass. We just passed SB 253 and SB 261, the famous disclosure bills that require companies to disclose their emissions and their climate-related financial risk. We worked on those bills for 3 or 4 years. They were never going to make it through in one session. But this January deadline is quite a big deal. The other thing that's happening in January is that January 19th is the last day that authors are supposed to send bills to Legislative Council. So everybody's just scrambling in January. Next slide, please. February 16th is the last day to introduce bills, including spot bills. And spot bills are kind of a cagey way around the deadline. An author can send a bill to Leg Council that says, it is the intent of the legislature to do something about cap and trade. And that may come across as a bill, and then the author has time to amend content and specifics into that bill. So there are always a bunch of spot bills. There were tons of them last year, I think, just because it was taking people a long time to get organized. So between the middle of February and the end of April, the policy committees are meeting. They are evaluating bills. They're scheduling them for hearings. We are frantically drafting position letters and weighing in hearings. And that pretty much eats up the time until the end of April. Next slide, please. And then in May, it's all got to get done. So the middle of May is when the Appropriations Committee's deadline is to let us know whether bills are living or dying, and they always go right up to the deadline. And if I didn't check to see what the days of the week is, but most likely May 17th is a Friday and May 20th is a Monday. So Appropriations lets out their live or die decisions by a Friday, and the next Monday and Memorial Day always gets in the way. All the voting has to happen on the floor for the bills that were introduced in the first house. Next slide, please. Then the second house starts. And it's crazy because you've got about 4 months to get the bills that were introduced in January through the first house. And you've got about 2 months with a summer recess in the middle to get them through the second house. There's probably an assumption made somewhere that the first house was going to do a lot of cleanup and it'll be easier to get the stuff through the second house. That doesn't really hold water, especially because if the first house is the Senate and the second house is the Assembly, and it's a bill that has some import for the climate, it's the second house that's really tough. And it's the second house when oil and gas are going to come in with the big bucks and their intensive lobbying campaigns and try to kill the bills. So fortunately, it's pretty much over by the end of August, and everybody is exhausted. And then, next slide, whatever has survived goes to the governor. And he's got a month to sign or veto bills. And we're not resting at that point either, because we don't know what he's going to do. And so there's always a lot of scrambling around to try to put pressure on the governor to sign or veto the bills that we care about one way or the other. So that's pretty much the legislative year. Between the beginning of October and the beginning of the next session, and the 2025 session will actually start in December of 2024, that's when we're all scrambling to try to figure out what we want to introduce in the next session. And of course, there are elections to worry about. So this is full-time work. It's full-time work for the legislature. It's full-time work for us. And because it moves along pretty quickly, faster than we'd want it to, it's quite exciting. But that's our year. And the good thing is that we've got a lot of volunteers and a lot of people working on this in at all stages, and we share the load. So I'm now going to turn over to Adam, who is going to show you some of the tools that we use to actually track these bills and do this work. So thanks for listening.
All right, thanks so much, Janet. Hi, everybody. My name's Adam Sweeney. I'm from San Jose here in California. I help lead our local chapter of the Climate Reality Project here in Silicon Valley, and I work with Janet at Climate Action California. But before I get started, I just wanted to say one thank you. I wouldn't know anything that I'm talking about today if it wasn't for Kathy Schaefer, who is also helping with today's call. Kathy very kindly took the time to hold my hand in learning this stuff just last year. Didn't know any of this before that. And now I'm here to teach you about it. So thank you very much, Kathy. All right, let me share my screen here real quick. One sec. Looks like we're almost there. All right. So we're going to start on the California Legislative Information website. This is one of the most important websites when you're really trying to learn your way around how legislation works. It's the home of a database with all the information about every bill. And so it's very, very useful. Now, typically, especially as a newbie, you come here looking for information about a particular bill. The one we're going to use as an example today is one I think many of you care a lot about, SB 252, the pension fund divestment bill. So if we want to look it up, we come to the home tab here on the LegInfo page, go into bill number, like SB 252, hit return, and voila, there it is. right? You can see, you know you're in the right place because you see the title of your bill right here. Come down, you can see who created this bill in the first place, who are the authors. Co-authors are legislators that have signed up to really help to get the bill passed. And then as you go down, this first page has the text of the bill itself. This is the whole bill, everything that's going to change in the law. Where it starts is with a bunch of very helpful text from the Legislative Counsel's office. They, as Janet mentioned, are the ones that take, kind of rough bills and turn them into real legal text. And in doing so, they provide helpful information to people like you and me to understand, what is this bill about? What's it going to do? Below that, you'll often first find a section of declarations, right? The legislature finds and declares all of the following. Here they say a bunch of things that they think to be true and are kind of the background reasoning for the bill itself. Kind of handy, sometimes a little funny. And then below that, you generally find often a set of definitions, and then you'll find the text of the bill itself. And that's it. Like this one is pretty short, right? One of the things you'll notice, like, this isn't a very long bill. This is not something to be afraid of. It's just something you go and you read, and if you can't understand it, you look for more help, and we'll talk about that. But often, just right here, reading it yourself, you can find your way through the bill. It's definitely not something to be afraid of or super intimidated by, like, I'm not a lawyer, how would I ever do this? No. Read it, you'll get it. It's just not that big a deal. One other little tidbit, this one doesn't have much of it, but we can see right here, the shall is in blue. This is because this bill was amended to include the word shall there in its last amendment. And when things are taken out in amendments, you'll see them here in red with a strike through the text. And we'll see a little more about that later. But here in the main text tab, you can see the latest amendments to the bill. All right, so now that we found our bill and we can see what it's all about, we might want to know what's going on with the bill. And so they have this handy status tab here. So there's a whole bunch of tabs here. They have a bunch of different information that we're going to look at. The status tab is, of course, useful for saying what's the status of the bill. What I find most helpful here is that it tells me where it is in committees most of the time, or if it's past the committee, where it is on the floor. You can see here that this particular bill went to the Public Employment and Retirement Committee in the Assembly, and it never left, unfortunately. Right? If you were paying attention, this was kind of upsetting. It got stuck here this year and is hopefully coming back in the coming session. But typically, if there's an upcoming hearing, you would see both the committee location here and the date for that upcoming hearing. Why do you care about those things? You care about them if you're going to submit support or opposition letters for a bill. That's a lot of what, like, I personally have started doing as a beginning lobbyist here. It's a great place as a grassroots operation to get your feedback in there, get it seen in writing and seen by the committees that are going to look at these bills. And so often you can see those deadlines, and those deadlines are really important because the deadline, well, you can see the hearing date. The deadline for submitting your letter we'll get to is usually earlier than that, but you need to know it's coming. Now, once you're looking at a particular bill and you're trying to pay attention to what's happening with this bill, they have this very handy feature here called Track Bill. Oh, it wants me to log in real quick. Pardon me. And here you can tell it, I usually select just send me everything because it doesn't send you very much. Send me updates on every time something interesting happens with this bill, every time a committee votes on it, every time it gets assigned to a new committee or it goes to the House floor. These are things, if you're following a bill, that you're going to want to know. And this is the best way to do it. You don't want to have to look at this website every day to see if anything happened. So getting these emails is very helpful. All right, going back and back again. Okay, thank you. So let's see, another really important tab here is the bill analysis tab. These are really handy, especially when you're trying to understand the bill and who's kind of being active around the bill. So if we go to say, and these analyses are written by the staff of a particular committee or a particular house, and they contain lots of information about what do those staff people think about the bill? What do they think the issues are that this bill is addressing? What do they think it does? What do they think it fails to do? So they criticize in these analyses. And one of the great things you see is often lists of supporters and opponents of the bills. Those are people who submitted support and opposition letters in time for the hearing that the analysis was put together for. So let's take a quick look at one here. Now they're all PDF files, so they come right up. And you can see they have a nice executive summary you can go through. What is this law doing? And a bunch of thoughts about the bill, which are often very interesting and sometimes, very often well thought out. And then, kind of importantly, later on in the analysis, you can see who are all the groups that submitted letters in support. You can see these all of our climate friends here were submitting support for SB 252. A lot of them, as we can see, and you can see who's opposed to it. Of course, here we see. We'll always see any climate bill, almost always see these guys in opposition. They're, as Janet said, they are the other side. And so these analyses can be really handy. Also, in the analysis, let's see, does this one have it? This one, unfortunately, this one does not have it, at least at the end. You can often find the author of the analysis and you can call them. And I'll show you a little more about how to reach the committee staff when you have questions about a particular bill. And finally, the last thing I want to show you about the LegInfo page is how to look at what amendments were made to the bill. All right, so if we come here, this one, we can compare all the way to the beginning. Like what happened? And this is where that red and blue text we talked about comes into play. You can see what amendment happened on what date, usually associated with a committee, as Janet was describing. This one didn't get touched very much. You can see they added the very important shall there, and they changed the date by when they would need to get out of all these investments from 2030 to 2031. Sometimes these are little changes like this. Sometimes the whole bill looks like it got demolished and rewritten. It really just depends what happens in that particular committee. All right, that's it for LegInfo. Now we're going to go take a look at the websites for the Assembly and Senate houses. First, we'll start with the Assembly. They have a nice web page. You can see who the speaker is, Mr. Robert Rivas, down here on the left. You can see information about their schedules. Things are kind of quiet this time of year. It's December. Most of the action, as we saw on the calendar, is earlier in the year. One of the most important things you'll find here is the list of committees. All the committees, every committee has their own website. That's very important to be able to find when you're trying to submit information to them and you want to see what they're doing. Since we're talking about SB 252 today, let's take a look at the Public Employment and Retirement Committee website. They're the ones who held on to this bill specifically because their chair, Tina McKinner, just decided to do so in the name of gathering more information. We'll see how that goes. So there's some really important information here, especially if you're looking to submit support letters for particular bills. The deadline for a hearing is probably the most important thing. And we can see here, it's telling you this one, they're like, get your letter in before noon, time is important, on the Friday before a Wednesday hearing. That's kind of vague, right? Like it sounds specific, but my experience is that's not always how it works, because sometimes the hearing's on a Tuesday. Like, what do you do? Well, when it's vague, what you do is you come down to the committee information section and you call them and you ask them, what's the deal? And it turns out they're really nice. They're really friendly. They are there to help you. They try really hard. So if you have any question like this, just call. You're calling some staffer in Sacramento, and they're there to help you, and they do a great job at it. So I don't be afraid to call. It's not a scary thing at all. Another interesting tidbit that you'll see about this particular committee, and the committees vary. They want their letters signed and on letterhead. Not every committee cares about signatures. I don't think most of them do, but some do, and you have to know, because if you leave it off because you just put it in, Google Docs and you didn't print it out and sign it, they're not going to take your letter. Like that. That's actually obviously not what you want. So now, when we're looking for hearings, right? If you want more information about hearings, you can come down to the daily file section, and there's a committee hearings link. Unfortunately, it's December. There's not much going on, but normally you would see important details here about the hearings that are coming up for this particular committee. There's also the daily file, which is very similar. It has information about what's going on in hearings and what bills are they going to address in any given hearing. And so this is another place to find like the agenda for particular meetings and what's going on. These are some subcommittees seem to be meeting even here in December. Now, finally, as I mentioned before, and I just want to repeat myself, if you are unsure about anything with regard to your bill, don't be afraid to call the committee where it's being looked at and ask. And don't be afraid to call the office of the author of the bill, and ask them. They want their bills to pass. You're there to, especially when you're there to support them. Call them and ask. They'll be happy to help you. I recommend calling their Sacramento office most of the time for these kind of questions. The folks in the district office are a little less involved in the legislative side of things, and more in the constituent service side of things. Finally, let's just take a quick look at the state Senate website. It's mostly the same. You can come here to committees. You can see a nice long list of all the committees. We could go back to the public. They have their own version of the public employment one. And I think the one last thing that I haven't mentioned here is that there's a portal for submitting advocacy letters. If you want to support or opposition letter, you create an account on the position letter portal, and that's where you submit them. When you have an account, you'll see you get to put in a nice picture of yourself, smile, be friendly, and then they keep track of all the letters that you've submitted. And when you go to submit a letter, you just click here, you tell them which bill you want to put it on. It'll find it for you. There's a couple more little simple questions that ask, like, are you opposed? Are you supporting? And you could submit your PDF and get it into the portal where everyone on the staff and everyone from the author's office and any other office that wants to look at it can see your letters. So that's about it for our little tutorial today. I hope that's useful. Don't be afraid to try any of this. You're not going to go wrong. So back to Janet. I think we're going to talk a little more about state budgets.
Yes. Thanks, Adam. And I'm delighted that everybody had a vacation from listening to me, for listening to Adam, who was really great and on top of all of this. I'm going to talk just for a minute about the budget. We could have a whole training about the budget. It's long and complicated and crazy, but the important thing to know is that the budget unwinds during the year in a kind of a parallel way to all of the bills that are being passed. And the budget is where the details of implementation for the bills that were passed the previous year shows up in general. So I'm just going to spin through the budget year just to give you a sense of how this all happens. It really is important. We just heard a couple of days ago that the tax receipts that have finally come in are much lower than were expected. They're talking about a $54 billion deficit for next year, which is scary for us because a couple of years ago, there was about a $54 billion surplus that got turned over to the climate. And now everybody's going to be trying to claw that money back. But it's just important to kind of keep your eye on the budget, although it doesn't feel like advocates have a whole lot of sway as much as we do on bills. So anyway, with that preface, January 10th is the deadline for the governor to send a draft budget to the legislature. February 1st is when he sends trailer bills to the legislature, and trailer bills are often small and specific bills that include the statutory language that implements the line items in the budget. And we'll talk about a little bit more about them in a second. So the legislature gets the governor's budget. The Legislative Analyst's Office analyzes that budget and makes reports to the budget committees in both houses. And that sort of goes on through about February. In a normal year, when the state taxes are paid by April 15th, they start working on something called the May Revise. This is ungrammatical, but that's what it's called, which kind of ground truths the actual amount of money that the state will have to put in the next year's budget. And unlike the federal government, the state cannot carry a deficit, so the budget has to be balanced. Next slide, please. So this year was very much more complicated than this because both the federal government and the state delayed the tax filing deadline first to October and then to November. And so the legislature was sort of flying blind, trying to negotiate a budget because they weren't really going to know how much money there was going to be. And now I think they're going to be tinkering with it for quite a while because it has to balance. But this is just in a normal year. The May Revise comes out on May 15th. The Senate and Assembly budget committees start ripping up whatever they were working on before to try to make their proposals fit in the actual amount of money that we have. And then the legislature has a June 15th deadline for passing the budget. And you'd think that was the end, but it's not, because the governor then has a couple of weeks to sign the budget. He can actually delete lines, budget lines. It's called blue penciling. And meanwhile, the trailer bills are popping up, and they're all actually listed on the Department of Finance website, but they have until September 15th to pass. So in a lot of ways, the budget isn't really done until September 15th, because the budget and the trailer bills are what determines what's going to be spent on what. And the meanwhile, the fiscal year has started on July 1st. It's a little nutty, but that is that's a short course on just how complicated the budget is. So you can see that the legislators who are working on bills all through these months also have to worry about the budget. And most of them are on budget subcommittees and meeting about the budget while they're passing bills. So that's the end of today's presentations. And now the good part, your questions, which we're really anxious to hear. And I see some of them in the question section and more in the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and Joan to put questions to us, and we'll turn into a panel and answer them as best we can. So thank you.
Okay, we will start. So a question from Kathy, not this Kathy. Why are trade unions opposed to climate action? Aren't there lots of green building projects?
Such a good question. You know, it's kind of mysterious. My guess is that a lot of them are kind of in bed with oil and gas. And it's a rare event when the trade unions, except for SEIU, which isn't exactly a trade union, actually advocates on the side of climate bills. It's something that we need to work on. And if folks in this audience have great relations with unions, come and talk to us, because I think it's a kind of a deficit in the climate movement. We don't have the relationships we need. So good question.
So I have a question from both Megan and Mary. If a letter must be signed and on a letterhead, does that mean an individual can't submit a letter of support, only organizations?
No, just gin up some letterhead. Yeah, by all means. And when you go into the portal, you have a choice to either you can put in your letter as an individual or as representative of a group or multiple groups. So yeah, just make up some letterhead.
Perry has a question about farm. I'm going back to her original question. So sorry. Let me start with that one. Perry, on what basis does the Farm Bureau oppose climate legislation in California? And what does that have to do with water? Two-part question.
Well, agriculture is a giant source of greenhouse gases in California. Utterly vast. Animal agriculture, especially. Dairies, especially. And I just think that's the answer. It's really tough. The Farm Bill, the Farm Bureau is advocating for no changes to the way dairies run, and dairies are also extremely, those piles of manure are polluting water everywhere in the Central Valley, air and water. I don't know if that answers your question, Perry, but that's yeah. They see us as a tremendous threat, and we, when we're working on methane, which Climate Action California does all the time, we're never in agreement with the dairies.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Mark wants to know, what is the role of the majority leader and what about the caucus chair?
I don't, I think the leadership includes a majority leader, the whip, the caucus chair. I think what most of those people are is sort of they're kind of the brain trust for the speaker or for the pro tem. I mean, definitely the whip's job is to count votes, and I think they probably all do that. The caucus chair, organizes caucus meetings, which can happen at any time in the session. But I think mostly having those positions to appoint people to gives them some status and access to the speaker or the pro tem. I hope that's a good answer.
Thank you. And I'm doing a time check here. We have so many great questions and running out of time. Possibly this will be our last question. From Amanda, can a bill that was passed by both houses and then vetoed by the governor be reintroduced with identical language for the next cycle? Thinking about SB 394 in particular.
I think the answer is no, but it can be brought back for an override vote if it's been, which takes 2/3 of both houses. It doesn't happen very often, but my understanding is that it's got to be tweaked or changed if it's utterly dead. You've got to make some changes in order to bring it back in the next session. Boy, there are lots of questions here.
Yeah, Megan wants to know which houses and committees allow or don't allow Me Too comments or support.
Well, all of them allow Me Too comments of support. The problem is that unless we can get the assembly to change the rules, the assembly wants folks in person at the hearings who are going to be testifying. In the Senate, you can phone in and put in and what a Me Too is like. You get to say, "Hi, I'm Janet from Climate Action California, and we strongly support this bill." That's all you get to say. But it is good to be there, and to line up with a whole lot of other people giving Me Toos. The Senate allows you to do this on the phone. The Assembly, under the former speaker, has required that people be there in person in order to make their Me Toos. And so we've looked for a petition from us. Kathy and I are working on this to try to get Rivas to allow remote participation in hearings. I mean, you really can't ask anybody from LA or even San Jose to go to Sacramento for a hearing because you can't get there without many hours in horrible traffic. So
I have one last question that kind of got buried, and I'm sorry, Jeff, but I'm going to ask your question now. Let's see. My understanding is that in districts or states where one party is locked in, the real action is in the primaries. So should we be paying more attention to the primaries?
Oh, I think the primaries are going to be tremendously important.
All right, so I have a question from Jeff. I've heard from several sources that it's pointless to communicate with any politician at any level unless you are their constituent. Is that true?
I don't believe that for a minute. And, when we meet with legislators, I open those meetings to everybody, and people list the groups that they represent. And when we met with Senator Laird a couple of months ago and had 35 people signed up, and he was really impressed. And I think, that's one of the things that the pandemic has done, is that now that we're always meeting remotely, or nearly always, I think it's important to say, these are the people who really care what you're doing, and they're representing these groups, and we're all behind these ideas. And, we organize those meetings, and it's very rare that anybody says, oh, well, I mean, we have constituents who go, but other people too. And I think it's important. And the other thing is that if you are advocating for a bill and you call that author's office, even if you're not a constituent, and you say, I'm Joe Blow, I live in some other place, and I really want to help you with your bill, they'll talk to you.
And can I just add to that, Janet?
Of course.
Which is, that's what you need to do, is call. If you attempt an email through the website, you have to be a constituent. That's the other side of it. Calling them is definitely helpful.
There are a lot of questions about the organizations. I don't know if we have time to start to address them or not. I'll give you one. How do the bills Climate Action California and other groups watch fit into California's scoping plan, or are they largely separate entities? Is there a way to track the progress of the scoping plan?
So the scoping plan is a document that CARB labors over every few years, and I think it's every 5 years they release a new scoping plan. All of us, there were bajillion groups made comments on the scoping plan and on the various elements of the scoping plan as it was being developed. We met with CARB board members. We collaborated with other groups in our comments. We did everything we could. They actually wrote a pretty decent scoping plan describing the project, the problem, not so great when it came to prescribing responses to the problem. So we're now looking at the legislature to try to enact some laws that will treat some of the issues that the scoping plan didn't really handle. But I think you have to just watch. The CARB website has a terrifyingly long list of topics you can sign up for alerts on. And a lot of us have signed up for more alerts than we want to pay attention to. But you just have to watch CARB, and you have to be prepared to weigh in at hearings. And I think that, because a lot of us are on it, if you join some of our groups that are paying close attention to CARB, it'll be easier. We can go together. I hope that's a good answer, but the scoping plan was really a major disappointment last year.
We have time for maybe two more.
Yeah, we'll just keep taking questions until people can't stand it anymore. Our folks leaving 91 people in the Zoom. So
Do you have one, Kathy? You're muted.
Let's see. How vulnerable to clawbacks will home energy conservation tax credits and rebates and coupons be?
hard to say, but I think that's where we're going to come in and be advocating to keep that money where it needs to be.
So I think that's all we have time for right now.
I see one question I want to answer.
Okay.
So Molly said, people are saying the utility tax in the large budget bill, AB 205, got slipped in days before the assembly voted on it. Can you explain how that happened? And Adam may want to answer this question, but he doesn't. Oh, okay. So I'm just going
No,
to
you
say,
take it.
go ahead, go, Adam.
I mean, the reality is that as Janet mentioned before, trailer bills are kind of chaotic this way, right? They happen at late in the session on very short time frames. Often with a lot of input from the governor's office driving what they want to go along with the budget. I think, the history on this one in particular, it wasn't really quite as secret as you may have heard. I've talked to some of the folks from Turn who actually talked about that this was coming and what it meant much more than 3 days before it was signed. So I think officially it probably did show up kind of late, but it's not that this was some secret conspiracy against anyone.
And it did have hearings in the budget committees. It's just that trailer bills go really fast because there are jillions of them. So kind of what happened. Let's see if there are other questions. Anything else that looks important? Oh, I know there was a question about how you look up bills by number. And one of the things, Adam, that I don't know that you covered it, but you can, when you're in LegInfo, you can search by author. And you can get a long list of all the bills that legislator has carried in the past or is carrying now. And that is a very good way you can sort of scan the bill titles, which Leg Council tries to make clear. And I think that's another helpful part of LegInfo is to find out how individual representatives are doing and how their bills are faring. So,
and you can also do keyword searches if you don't know who the author is. And if you get stuck, ask your friends. Some one of us in the climate world will know.
Yep, we're here to help. So, are we really done with questions?
I think we're pretty much done. We have comments, but no questions.
Okay.
So preview of the next.
Yeah. So Kathy, maybe you can give us a preview of the next training, which will be fabulous in January. And then I'm going to ask Sheila and Adam to talk a little bit about Third Act and Climate Reality Project.
Well, today was all about process and background information and important background information. At our next training in January, it's going to be the nuts and bolts. How do you make a phone call? What do you say? What do your support letters look like? What should you include? How do you get a meeting with a legislator? It's actually not that hard, especially if you're working as part of a coalition or with a group. So we are going to be just talking about how you do it, how you get your foot in the door, what to say and what to write.
And it's going to be great. Thank you. So, Sheila, you want to tell us a little bit about Third Act and
I
how
do.
people...
Thank you, Janet. Before I say a word about Third Act, I have to thank our incredible presenters this afternoon, Janet, Adam, and I think is Mary. I'm not sure Mary is still here. Maybe she had to run, but the three of you were incredible. And the questions were, here's Mary, excellent. Thank you, all three of our presenters. And the questions, just terrific, along with great answers. So I know I learned a lot. I know I am very much looking forward to January 4th, when we will dive into the advocacy and lobbying that Kathy was just talking about, and that I know is what we all want to be able to do. It was great to hear that January 3rd is the first day of the next legislative session, because the very next day we get to learn how to advocate at January 4th. Third Act. Third Act has just had its second birthday. So it's a new organization. It's a national organization. We have about 36 or more chapters around the country. And there are 3, as I mentioned at the start. In California, we have, I think it's something like 70,000 members nationally and 9,000 and counting here in California. It's been wonderful learning to work with all 3 of our regional groups, San Francisco, Sacramento, and I'm in Southern California, because we are learning to speak with one voice, to work with one voice. We have a California Legislative Committee representing all 3. And as Anthony has said earlier today, working as partners with Climate Action California, Climate Reality, I feel we're becoming really a powerful voice for Sacramento and for the Congress for 2024. So thank you for what you're offering us. I promise you will find Third Act ready to volunteer and work hard to make the changes we all want to see in climate. I, by the way, put the, if you want to learn more about Third Act, or if you're eligible, which means you're 60 years old or better, I put the link in the chat earlier, so you can learn more about us and maybe join us. Thank you and happy holidays to everybody.
And now Adam is going to plug Climate Reality.
Sure. Thanks everybody for listening in today. You know, the Climate Reality, like many climate groups, focuses on educating people about climate issues. And, you know, and these days we spend a lot of time advocating locally at the state level and the larger group nationally and even internationally. But here in California, we have plenty to keep us busy. My advice, the thing I want to say to all of you is, no matter what group you work with, it's so great if you just get involved and actively do something, anything, doesn't really matter. Just whatever catches your interest, put some time into it. It makes a difference. And it's the most important thing to all of our groups, is to have active members who get out there and try to make something happen. Thank you very much.
Well, it's just, this has been great. And I'm so grateful to our panelists and to all of you who came and stuck with it. We're about 5 minutes over where we thought we would be, which isn't too bad. But I think this has been great. And I can just tell you that Climate Action California is always looking for more volunteers, and we can plug you in at any level for any amount of time or any amount of work that you want to do. And we're very nice people, and it's kind of fun. So that's the best I can say for Climate Action California. So with that, have great holidays. Come back in January, on January 4th at 4 o'clock for the next part of this 2-part training. And we'll see you later. Thanks.